also have this irrational need to have both my face and my hands close to the mic at all times. So I'm just like, am I doing it right?
I know where like I'm clapping so my face could be.
Gremlins crouched over the microphone.
Okay, we got to get into this.
Okay.
All right, family. Welcome to your safe space, the podcast your partner, friends, parents, whoever thinks is dirty. Don't have time to read books? Want to understand the jokes in the TikToks? We got you, fam. We're the Spice Traders, and we deal in spicy books. I'm Katie, and I need it to make it make sense.
I'm Des, and I would love to talk about feelings today.
I'm Liz, and I'm hypercritical. As always, we start every episode with 3 things. The first is a generic trigger warning. You can find specific triggers for this book in our show notes. Please check them out, and if you have sensitivity to any of these, please give this episode a skip.
Secondly, we talk about books, the whole book, nothing but the book, so help me goddess. If you plan to read this book and don't want something spoiled, don't listen to this episode.
Lastly, we acknowledge that a good book can hit you at the wrong time. The views expressed in our discussion are our opinions, and we absolutely don't want to diminish the work and the talent of the authors in our community. That said, we have some notes. So Liz, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're talking about Ice Planet Barbarians, which is the first book in a current 22-book series by Ruby Dixon. This first book was published in April of 2015. On the Kindle version, there is 188 pages. In the physical copy, there are about 336 pages, so it's a short to mid-length book. I finished it in about a day. Pretty quick read. So let's get into it. Katie.
In part 1, we start off by meeting Georgie Carruthers. And this book is primarily told from the first-person perspective. So this first chapter in part 1 is told from Georgie's perspective. And she's in a dream sequence where there's a lot of symbology about abandonment, cold rooms, there's a train in a tunnel. She's not able to move her arms, and then she wakes up, and she's been abducted by tiny green men.
Now hang on, I want to go back a little bit because the book starts with, up until yesterday, I, Georgie Carruthers, never believed in aliens. And I'm like, I don't think anybody picks up this book and goes, you know what? Me neither.
With the title of Alien Barbarians?
Ice Planet Barbarians. So, maybe they didn't know what they were getting into. But, I feel like this book is so popular in so many places that, if you read the back cover, you understand that there are going to be aliens.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I think if I woke up on an alien spaceship, which we will get to, I would have similar feelings. Like, oh, they're here.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between not believing in aliens and waking up and being abducted. So I understand that, maybe it might have been a possibility, but I didn't take it seriously thing.
That's fair. I will also say, talking about the imagery of her dreams, I'd forgotten about, of course, this is my second read through of this book, and so I'd forgotten about that. What I don't love is it doesn't seem to have any significance to the rest of the story. As we continue to talk about it, it just... it doesn't tie to anything, and so I'm not really sure where we were going with that, if anywhere.
I even made a note. I was like, I wonder if this comes back. Nope, it super doesn't.
It super doesn't.
Yeah, I think the only thing that we learn about Georgie at all, even description wise, is that she used to work in a bank as a teller, and that's about it. We do learn a little bit more about kind of why that might be, but so we'll get into it a little bit further. So she's abducted by these tiny green men. She's essentially being treated in some way. I think the assumption here is that she's being inoculated or given her, quote, shots at a vet. But these green men are described as being what you would picture coming out of Area 51, small, green, big, black eyes, that kind of thing. But once they're done with her, essentially, she gets thrown into this holding cargo bay situation, and there are a couple of other girls in a cage. And then when she wakes up, she meets one of the other girls, who is Liz. Hello.
Hello.
And we learn that Georgie is from Orlando, Florida.
I did love the representation of that, as I, too, am a Floridian.
As am I.
She also mentions at one point, talking about the pajamas she's sleeping in, and it made me really think about what I go to sleep in, because if I were abducted, it would be most inconvenient.
Oh, I think about that constantly when I go to bed. Not just from an abduction situation, but from like a murder, house fire, a flood situation. Growing up in Florida, like hurricanes, that's a very real thing. Uh, Pajamas not appropriate for a disaster,
See,
typically.
I go to bed
No,
mostly fully clothed, so I'm all right.
you're fine.
Always
This is right.
prepared. So anyway, from a conversation that they have, we learn that most of the women in this cage are around 22 years of age. They all live alone. They are all quote unquote healthy, and they are not pregnant, mostly.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up was like they just casually throw in abortion as like this thing that's happening where like one of the girls they picked up was pregnant and so they just and I quote like vacuumed her out like it was no big deal.
Yeah.
Um which I appreciate the connotation of like it was no big deal because it is obviously a very big deal, but like also just casually threw that in there is like setting the stage for what sort of bleak situation that they're in.
Within the
100%.
first chapter.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
kind of jump straight to abortion. Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of the bleakness, the author, one, I love the way the author writes. I think that, the way that she writes from Georgie's perspective is immediately relatable and easy to read. It's fun. I did not have trouble getting into this book.
I am hypercritical and I will be the grammar police. Ruby Dixon, I also love her writing, but she, or maybe it's Georgie's voice, loves her some ellipses. We just love throwing ellipses in there, and I kept a tracker, and there are 26 ellipses used throughout the book,
That's a lot.
all by Georgie, but only really in parts 1 and 2, and then she drops the ellipses, which, as a casual reader, probably no one else is going to notice that.
So the other part in this book that they talk about was they talk about how many women are in the cages, and then there's like six, I think, six more girls in like these life tubes.
Mm-hmm.
Life tubes is not
Life
the word
tubes.
that I should be using. We find that out from Kira, who has the has a translator that they've stapled essentially to her head so she's able to understand. But I can't remember how many girls did they start out with in the cage. Now that I'm looking at my notes, I realize I don't actually have that.
There's 15 until Dominique arrives, so there's a total of 16, including those in the stasis tubes.
So
Got it.
let's get
Okay.
into, importantly, there is a second type of alien, and these are kind of described as being the policemen or people of this situation. They're described as basketball heads, and the thing that you're picturing right now in your head is probably exactly what they look like. They have this orange skin that's textured like a basketball. They're much taller and much like bigger than the tiny green men, and that's probably why they're used for muscle. But the reason that the women have to be quiet in the cage is because these particular aliens don't like loud noises. And all of the other women, except for Georgie, seem to be aware of the consequences, but they won't talk about why. Until a new girl is introduced, and her name is Dominique.
Before we get to Dominique, I have a confession to make. We're a healthy way through the book, right? Like we've been talking here for a little bit about what's happening in the book. I would like to confess to you guys that it wasn't until they mentioned that these were all women who were in the cages that I realized that Georgie was a girl.
Oh.
I was definitely under the I did not know where we were. I thought this was a man. I spent a lot of time thinking that, and then was corrected at this point in the book, and I felt very silly.
I mean,
So I just needed.
it's valid, right? I think one of the things that I have a problem with in this book is that we don't actually know what Georgie looks like at all. We know next to nothing about her, except for what we're provided with in her internal monologue and what other characters see, which is not a lot. I don't think we even know what color her eyes are. So we don't know if
Right.
she's African American or white or, whatever. We just don't get that
Straight
information.
hair, curly hair.
Right. So we're introduced to Dominique. She is described as being French Canadian and with red hair. When she wakes up, she does start screaming. And what we learn is that the basketball head aliens grab her as they are, pretty much given free reign to quote unquote punish or do things to the women to make them stay quiet. And so what they end up doing is they end up raping Dominique, gang raping her in front of all of the rest of the women. But through this whole thing, we learn that Kira, the woman with the hearing device implanted in her head, can hear what they're saying, and she basically shuts down. There's another woman in the cage that looks like she must have gone through the same thing because she is described as being sick with grief. And, eventually Dominique stops screaming and the ordeal is over.
There's a quote in the book that I really appreciated where it says, "Don't look," Liz whispers to me. "I look, though. Someone has to look. Someone has to see." And I thought that that was such a powerful moment because these women are captured and there's not a whole lot that they can do. But I think Georgie is looking and saying, like, I'm going to use this. I'm going to use this rage that I'm feeling to figure out a way out of this. And as we get to very shortly, like, we do get to that point where they work on getting out. And so much of her rage is I think, triggered by so many things, but this moment in particular.
And Georgie very much steps up as the leader, like, immediately.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, to your point, Des, that was important for her to watch was that for me, almost the lack of description about the basketball heads and, the, I guess, logistics of what was happening didn't really matter because we live in a society, unfortunately, where this could have easily translated to human men, right? And that part really made my stomach churn because it was all too relatable. It didn't seem far-fetched at all, and I think that was an important moment in the book, right? To say, to illustrate with very little words, like the impact that this has on the main character. So as we've kind of alluded to, this experience motivates both Georgie and Liz to attempt to plan to break out somehow. And this is kind of the first time that we hear that not only are these basketball head aliens kind of large and physically imposing, but they also have some sort of gun. And so that factors into their plan. But crucially, altruistically almost, Georgie doesn't want to sacrifice any of the women in their plan and leave them behind, including the women who are kind of cryo. So they hatch this plan to essentially overpower one of the guards and then gain control of the ship. But as they start to hatch this plan, it's clear that there is some kind of trouble brewing on the ship. For one, there are usually 2 guards at any given time, but now there's only one, and he looks very concernicus, looking kind of around the room, listening to what we suppose are the little green men saying over the loudspeakers. And in this kind of opportune moment, right, only one guard, Georgie and Liz decide to go ahead with their plan.
And as that goes down, so they start their plan, but it's almost simultaneously, we find out through Kira, who can hear these announcements going on, that there is some mechanical failure in the ship. So as Georgie is executing her plan with Liz to overpower this guard, the section of the ship that they're in, the cargo hold, is dropped.
Right.
To the planet below.
So obviously with the whole, like, being jettisoned from a ship and crash landing on some sort of solid ground is jarring and leads to the girls, like, toppling because, like, the ship was not designed to do whatever that is. There's no, like, seatbelt situation on a ship like this. So obviously, like, they crash land and it is a hard fall and many people are injured. Liz wakes up with Georgie and they kind of are looking around and assessing the damage. And a bunch of girls are injured or hurt. I do believe 2 of them passed away. But one thing to note, before they crashed, point of order, before they crashed, you guys can clarify this, Georgie does kill the basketball head, and she sort of unleashes a fair bit of deserved rage on this basketball head. Like, she can't figure out how the gun works, so she just ends up smashing him with this gun, which is definitely a quote-unquote crime of passion, and ends up killing him as they are falling, or before they fall. It's a little unclear.
Before, yeah. I think the other thing to note, too, is that they had kind of a chamber pot situation, so that factored into their plan, but then also in the kind of process of crash landing onto a planet, everybody's covered in shit, and also the remains of this alien who she essentially bludgeoned to death. So they're all pretty gross. I'm surprised. So one of the things that I don't actually know how realistic this is, but Kira, the woman with the kind of earpiece that makes her understand the aliens, she's pretty smart and is into space, and she uses the context clues, which puts them, in her estimation, on a planet somewhere in the middle of the quote Oort cloud.
All right, so here's what the Google machine tells me about the Oort cloud. The Oort cloud is a spherical layer of icy objects surrounding our sun, a star, and likely occupies space at a distance between 2,000 and 100,000 astronomical units from the sun. It is outside of our planet. So, like, Pluto, and then some other nonsense, and then some space, and then Oort cloud.
So they crash land. There's kind of a crack in the hull of this essentially cube that has slammed into some unknown planet. Through that crack in this hull, they can intuit, because of the temperature, that it's very cold and snowy, because snow is kind of filtering in. They kind of take stock. Everybody's injured. Like we mentioned, a couple of women have passed. They ascertain that they have food and water for a week, but they also make the crucial decision not to wake up the women in the pods until they figure out a plan. And Georgie's inner monologue here was really relatable to me, because it's something I identify with. She wants a plan. She'll take charge when nobody else has any good ideas. But there's big, like, I don't trust anyone to do it as well as I can energy.
Yes.
And I love that about her. So the women decide that they need to send somebody out to understand where they are, kind of the lay of the land, blah, blah. And that's where Georgie really wants a plan. She takes charge and volunteers to go out in search. She's probably in the best shape of anybody. And so one of the things that she does to prepare for this journey is she strips the guard that she murdered out of his onesie, essentially. And this onesie is described as being kind of a weird material. It's obviously too big for her. The feet don't fit and the hands don't fit, but she makes it work. And there are, quote, invisible straps and buckles that she has to finagle. And I just have so many questions. Why are they invisible?
Right. Why are they invisible? Also, it's too big for her, but simultaneously tight, like around her chest, which makes me wonder the proportions of the basketball heads.
My point was in the same vein. So she has bludgeoned this basketball head to death, which means that these clothes are now covered in blood.
Covered in shit.
Oh, God, that's so
I want
gross.
to bathe
You're welcome.
immediately.
Always. So she gets out of the cargo hold, and this is where she sees that it's very snowy, very barren, and this is where the Not-Hoth nickname comes from. She's communicating with Liz specifically downstairs, and that's the name that it's coined as being, Not-Hoth. I really like this nickname. We don't use it a whole lot. I think it's mentioned like 5 times in the book in total. So Georgie is in Not-Hoth. She's in this jumpsuit, which apparently must be very insulatory because she's not dead. She is basically scaling down a mountain that the cargo hold has crashed into. And as she is going further and further away from the cargo hold, further down towards not mountainous territory, she's starting to encounter trees. And their description is really something else. They are tall and skinny with blue-green feathers and sticky, moist bark. Some with pink sludge at the very top. I picture bamboo with like glitter flubber on top, but it was not appealing. It's not like, what a great landscape.
I agree, it's not a great landscape, but I did love the description of the land and plant life. I think it was really unique and added more to that environment. Well, you pictured bamboo and flubber. I pictured whacked out truffle trees from Dr. Seuss.
Yeah. Similar vibes.
I could see those, yeah. And that's far more inviting, though, than I think that these likely were.
No, I know.
Yeah.
Katie's was like, no, that's the vibe, is that they are just gross and gooey.
So one of these, it's unclear to me how many of these are naturally occurring, like independent organism trees, and how many of them are attached to others, because she approaches this stream, the bank of a stream, and she's holding on to one of these like pink bamboo glitter flubber things. She looks down in the water and she sees basically what I picture as like a lamprey fish with it's one of these bamboo things like in its mouth, trying to I guess using it as a reverse fishing pole to like trap prey. Very Looney Tunes kind of situation for me.
I have a quote here that says, "Holy ellipses for you, Liz. Fuck, I nearly just got eaten by an alien fish. Ellipses for you, Liz. Thing."
So many ellipses. There don't need to be 2 in one sentence.
Truly. So after this near-death encounter, she goes further into the woods away from the stream. She's walking, and then whoop, gets caught in basically like a Looney Tunes style snare that she gets pulled up into a tree, rope around her foot, that kind of situation. She can't manage to free herself. She's hanging upside down. And just before she passes out, she sees a figure approaching us, and we get kind of this Yeti-esque description, very vague, but we are led to believe that it is some kind of monster. From here, we switch perspectives to a new word, and it is spelled Vektal. I hear it as Vectal.
I hear it as Vectal as well.
I also hear it as Vectal.
Excellent. Consensus.
3 for 3.
We all made it through. That's fantastic. So he's talking. He's snared this thing. He doesn't recognize it. It's very foreign to him, ironically. But a couple sentences into his internal monologue, we get a new word, which is SA-KHUI, which I hear as Sakui.
I had it as Sakui. Sakui.
Okay.
I also have it as Sakui.
Similar.
We're close enough.
Similar vibes.
Also, this language has a lot of hyphens.
The reason that we're introduced to the Sakui is because his, which is kind of like the equivalent of a soul, or like if you're familiar with like fated mates, like it's that string between you and the other person that like connects you. That is like rumbling in his chest. So he takes her to a cave, and Duder just immediately starts stripping her jumpsuit off. And she says,
smells like shit.
I know. Okay, so that's the whole thing. He's enamored, and that's cute, I guess, or whatever. But it's covered in shit, covered probably in brains and gore a little bit, and probably sweat because she hasn't bathed in a couple of days because she's been captive, right? She's got to smell and look like hell.
Yes. But he resonates for her.
So he strips her.
Yes.
And it escalates from there.
Wait. So before it escalates, I would like to point out that he thinks her pubes are adorable. That she has hair there and nowhere else. And my comment is, he thinks pubes are adorable. Cool.
What do the women of his culture look like? My note was, he specifically calls out that her body doesn't have any ridges, and the thought that keeps going through my mind whenever they mention ridges from now on is that Ruffles don't have ridges or some shit. And it's very disconcerting.
Oh my god, I love that.
Because they just become potato chips. So anyway, Georgie is passed out, and he starts performing oral on her, and kind of midstream, she wakes up and we switch back to her perspective. And this is where we learn that, one, he's very good at it, and two, the dude has horns. We also learn that he's bluish gray. He's got ridges. Ruffles have ridges. Down his face, he's got black hair, and he's kind of got these, what I assume to be very creepy, Caribbean blue, pupilless eyes.
Just straight glowing blue, which I also saw as creepy. So they're described as pupilless, and that is creepy to me. And every time they reference some expression regarding the eyes, I have a hard time picturing eyes making an expression when there's no pupil.
How do you know where they're looking?
Right.
So in this kind of situation where there's dubious consent, right? She's unconscious. He's just kind of going at it. She has this kind of honestly relatable internal monologue where she's like, I should be protesting and crying rape, but like, he's really good at this, and like, I could just really use the release, and I just went through a fuck ton of shit, and just give me like 2 minutes, okay? And then I'll be on my high horse, right?
So I did not interpret it that way at all. And I have so much seething rage about this moment because, like, first off, he says, I buried my face between her legs so I can taste all of her. What a typical male. I don't know what this thing is, but I have to have sex with it. Obviously, that's the answer.
She tastes like poop. She's covered in poop.
Also, so we cut to Georgie, and Georgie's like, I'm pretty sure I'm naked. There's a mouth between my legs, licking me like there's no tomorrow. Is that something that happens to you regularly? Like, do you just wake up with a tongue on your clit, and you're just like, well, what a Tuesday? Like, no, no, you don't. So, like, I did not interpret this at all as like, oh, you know, let me just relax here for 2 minutes. I interpreted it as like, girl, what are you doing? Get up. That's not a typical feeling that you should feel. Like, she has to be so out of it. And I don't understand. Maybe it's the blood that rushed to her head when she was upside down. I don't know how you get from point A to point B where you're just like, you know what? I love getting eaten out, and I'm on an alien planet, almost dead. I'm just going to let that happen. No!
So I had the same thought because she's very chill about the whole thing. And there's a quote that says, "It wasn't a monster come to eat me. It was this monster come to eat me out." And also, I don't care how good he is. I wouldn't be down with that. Like, the second I woke up and some blue creature is in between my legs, I'm going to kick you in the face. There's not enough time to know it feels good.
Right, exactly. And then at one point she says, this is from Georgie's perspective, his head lifts and he nuzzles at my bush, mumbling something again. My hands go to push his head back down to where I want it. So she is an active participant in, like, she has had enough consciousness in her brain to be an active participant in this, which means that she, at some point, understands what's happening and is still just fine with that.
But have you guys never woken up horny? Like, I don't know. Like, I kind of relate to it in a way that, like, okay, she just went through probably the most traumatic thing in her entire life, right? And she probably passed out thinking that she was going to never wake up again, right?
That's fair.
And so have you ever just woken up and just really wanted to get some and to have that, like, feeling of, oh, this is nice. I'm warm. There's a fire.
He's not killing
this guy
me.
is, I could be still dreaming, right? Like, that's kind of how I interpreted it. Like, not specifically, like, she was down to be ravaged by another alien, right? Like, not specifically that. I think she was just at surface level, like, I'm groggy. This feels nice. I'm just going to hit the snooze alarm, like, a couple of times. And then I'll deal with this when I wake up.
I like that better.
So the other problem I have with this, I can understand that, and I think that makes a lot of sense. But the other problem I have with this is, as you're reading through Vectel's perspective, he continues to talk about how, like, she is like a kit. She has no fur. She is like a kit. She has no cooey. Like, he's saying this is like a child, and then also having sexual relations with this being. And
oh yeah, that's 100% weird.
And I can't. I can't.
I didn't catch that, but that is a great point because, again, he doesn't know what she is. So it's also the equivalent of, I found this thing, it smells good, I'm gonna mate with it.
Yeah.
Yep.
It could be a blender, like, you don't know what that is.
It could be a fish, you have no idea. Okay, we gotta keep moving. So Vectel's doing his thing. Georgie wakes up. He goes to, like, go further than just oral, and this is when Georgie's flight response kicks in. Literally, she kicks him in the chest, and she ends up hurting herself more than Vectel because he is, like, this honed warrior figure and has a chest of steel, as men typically do in these types of novels. So, when that happens, Vectel is very confused. We are introduced to another new foreign word, which is spelled Sa-Kohtsk, which I hear as Sa-Kosk.
I also hear it as Sa-Kosk.
I also hear it as Sakos.
So this is where we learned that a Sa-Kosk is apparently some creature that you can kill, and that's how you get the Kui thing from. The other thing that I think is really well done in this book is that they obviously speak different languages, right? So Vectel speaks his alien language. Georgie speaks English because she's from Florida. But when Vectel is hearing Georgie speak in his perspective or vice versa, we kind of get this phonetic translation of how the other one's speaking. And so I picked out this specific instance. So Georgie is saying to Vectel from his perspective, "Is that your name?" or "That's your name." And it's translated, "That's your name." And I love this so much because growing up in Florida, I know people in Florida who speak like this. They literally say, "That's your name," like one word. And I just thought that the author did this really well. And it was a really clear depiction of, like, how they're not speaking the same language, but, like, you as a reader can understand what Georgie's saying when Vectel's hearing Georgie speak.
Yeah, I had that as very well done as well. And I enjoyed that because it kept it not feeling like two separate stories. Like, you still got their relationship.
Yeah, the one thing that I struggle with a little bit there is yes, I agree that that was done really well, but there are also parts where that doesn't make any sense at all because like when we're listening to Vectel's like self monologue or whatever, at one point he uses the word woman, and like if we're going off of this like being like an alien race, I don't know that woman makes sense, and so I think the author did a really great job of in the dialogue making sure that like there was a very clear language issue, but making sure that when we were hearing Vectel's thoughts, we as the reader understood what Vectel was saying.
Yeah, and I kind of pictured that kind of distinction as perhaps Bechtel's language is as varied as English, and so perhaps they have like a biological designation of female, and then also kind of that colloquial like woman that can mean a number of things, which in this case clearly only means biological females, but nevertheless, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
So in this kind of sequence, we are also introduced to a new word. It is spelled Metlaks, which I hear as metlax.
I also hear as metlax.
I misread it several times and pronounced it. Oh no, hang on. Now that you've said it, now I want to say it the way you're saying it, but it's not that. I was pronouncing it as Mechtels. Bechtel's like Bechtel, but it's because I was flipping some letters around, and it's definitely not Mechtels.
No, this is exactly why we do this, because sometimes I do that shit too.
Right. This is why we are sharing our pronunciations, because this is the hard thing about reading books.
Yes. So in this same sequence, we're also introduced to another new word, but it's in the concept of, or in this kind of internal monologue that Bechtel has where he's talking about the metlax, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, but he's also speaking about how Georgie essentially has a death sentence because she doesn't have a kui inside of her. We don't know why that is yet, but he's very motivated to get her a kui by taking down one of those saw kosks. But first, he realizes that he needs to feed her, and he goes and tries to find a kusk, which is Kuhsk.
They have 7 letters in this language.
Yes. I hear it as kusk, like the iwu sound in the middle of it.
I didn't, but I'm adopting it.
Yeah, kusk.
Kusk. So before he goes out to hunt for this kusk, we find out that the dude is 7 feet tall. He starts to undress, and this is when we learn that he is not actually a yeti, that he doesn't have white fur as well as blue skin, that he's wearing leathers underneath, but we don't get any more further information about like specifics. We do know, however, that he has a tail. He tries to give her rations, like hunting rations, which I intuited as like beef jerky, and for some reason these are just like very spicy, and I don't know why. I keep running the like TikTok thing of why is it spicy like in my head.
That's how I read it. Why is it so spicy?
There's not a lot of reason for why this is happening, but she literally can't eat it. It's so spicy. Instead, she's able to drink his water, like from a canteen. It's not a dirty thing. The next day, they leave this hunting cave that they've been kind of camping out in. Georgie kind of immediately realizes that she's I have her as G in my notes because I can't be bothered to spell. So G eventually realizes that they're going down the mountain away from her compatriots, but Bechtel is very insistent, and so she eventually relents, hoping that they can get enough food for the other girls before they head back up there. They're not really communicating at this point, so it's really much more of a bunch of grunts and pushes and looks, rather than actually understanding the words that each one of them is speaking.
I have a complaint to render because I'm hypercritical. There is twice in this book, and this is the first time that Georgie references having Stockholm Syndrome. And it's not Stockholm Syndrome because she volunteers to leave with him. She is not kidnapped. And it's been all of 6 hours. So,
right.
Just, I have to throw that out there. As a psychology professor, ma'am, this is not Stockholm Syndrome. You are not using these words correctly.
So they've concluded day 1. The next morning, they leave the cave, like I mentioned. They're kind of in this hunting grounds. That's why Vectel is where he is, and that's why he's so astonished at finding her there as well. We get the impression that it's not just him that have access to these hunting grounds, but potentially others on the planet as well. So it's a dangerous zone for more than one reason. But he kind of parks her on a rock and decides that he needs to go get something not spicy for her to eat. And so what he does is he goes and kills a small animal, which is described as kind of like a quilled beast, guts it, and then offers her the heart, which is still probably pulsing with electricity and warm, for her to eat. And she is understandably horrified. Yeah.
Fair.
So she takes a couple of bites of this raw meat, gets some food in her stomach, is horrified, but eventually they go back to the stream that Georgie had run away from originally, so like that lamprey looking fish situation. Vectel shows her a way to make it safe to like be in the stream, and when they do, they end up having this bathing scene. And so the thing about this, I realized two things. One, that we know nothing about what Georgie looks like. We don't know her hair color, her eye color. We don't even know what she might, how high she is, like nothing.
How high she is?
Yeah, no, how tall, like whatever. And then the second thing that we learn is that it's here, after he's eaten her out, after he's carried her to these hunting grounds, that Vectel notices two things. One, that she's injured. And that,
You're right.
two, she's covered in shit. And I have to ask, girl, really? Like, is your dick that much in control of your fucking brain hole that you have no idea that she's injured, broken in a pretty significant way, and that she's covered in fecal matter? I just can't with that.
Yep. That's a really good point.
That's a really good point. Also, so they have this bathing scene, which we could talk about more what happens. But Georgie undresses to get into the water, which is a heated river spring. It's heated. But at no point does she wash her jumpsuit. So she cleans her body, but then puts back on her gore shit suit.
So good.
Which, have you ever worked like mowing the lawn and then you shower? The last thing I want to do is put back on my disgusting.
And she could have washed it. She could have just given it I guess it would have been wet then. But
So
then it would have
easily.
been wet and she's in the snow.
So easily.
I can get it.
It probably would have frozen.
Yeah, and she would have frozen too. And like, she's just a tiny baby. She has no cooey. Like,
Just a tiny baby.
Ugh,
We
such a
do
tiny baby.
find out while they are bathing, because Vectel also takes his clothes off to get in the stream, that he has ridges on his penis.
He also has a knob on top of his dick. So picture where dicks come out, right? Not at the bottom where the balls are, but on top, closer to the belly button, there's a knob.
It's described as like a knuckle.
Right. So not technical. So if you've ever read a book where there's described as being like a love knot at the base of it, this is like a different thing. It's not a part of the dick itself. It's a separate knuckle on top of it.
Yes.
So another thing that we get, very, kind of typical bathing scene. And this is where I struggle. So they're washing each other. Vectel is described as washing Georgie as very factly, without any pressure. But then immediately she says that his dick keeps poking her back. And so for me, I'm like, which is it? Is it okay to be factual, or is he just like really trying to bang you?
the thing with that is, like, I can understand he is aroused and he does want to have sex with her, but he's trying to be respectful because she's indicated that she does not want that. And so he is, hi, I'm Desiree, and I don't know how penises work. I don't know if that's something you have a lot of control over. Like, are you able to be like, no thank you, erection, get out of here? Or do you have to, like, think about grandmothers, or is it just like, this is just your fact of life, and so therefore your dick is just there, and like, you're trying really hard to like do your taxes, but your dick is just there, and you can't get rid of it. So, I just don't know where it begins and ends.
Summertime. So at some point in this scene in the river, nothing sexual overtly happens. She's definitely baiting him, and they come to this understanding that she will do sexual things with him if he takes her back up to the mountain so that she can get back to the Krauss spaceship. And at some point in Georgie's internal monologue, she rationalizes it with herself by saying that she probably can't get pregnant because they're not the same species. And I'm like, that's a weird thing to think about in a romance novel where we assume everybody can't get pregnant unless you want to. So they exit the stream. There is talk of, and which I think was very realistic, right? Like you're in a bath, you get out, you don't have a hairdryer, you're on Not-Hoth, and your hair is wet. That's not exactly comfortable. So they have this situation where we are kind of going back up the mountain, but Vectel decides that they need to stop for the night because, one, Georgie's hair is wet and she could die. Two, they're not going to make it there tonight, and it's dangerous to walk around at night. All very good reasons. Anyway, Georgie gets pissed off, and so she keeps going without Vectel. And the description of the terrain here is very loose, I'll say. But I picture them kind of walking along a glacier, like in between two mountains, which can be very dangerous, and happens to be so because she falls into a cave, which is filled with metlaks. And we get a description of a metlak, which are kind of a cross between a Yeti and a Bigfoot, if Yeti and Bigfoot were both blonde and very dirty. They're humanoid, but taller than Georgie, as things in Not-Hoth tend to be, and they're not intelligent.
I pictured porgs, continuing with the Star Wars trend, but like giant porgs.
So she actually compares them to, they remind me a bit of Wookiees from Star Wars.
Eventually they do start to attack her. They kind of, descend upon her in a frenzy. There's a lot of them and only one of Georgie. But eventually Vectel does save her. He kind of comes crashing through the ceiling and ends up killing a bunch of them before dragging her out of that cave and into the safe cave.
I will say that I have 2 points here. One, Georgie, we do find out later from Vectel that metlaks are not intelligent. But Georgie assumes they're not intelligent on first glance, and I feel like that's kind of racist, because she never thought Vectel was not intelligent.
Well,
Also, she crashed through their roof.
So
Rude.
So she starts out because one hoots at her, and she responds with, hi, and she doesn't move at all. And then, like, all of a sudden the creature snarls and slaps her hand. I guess, like, she reached a hand out or something like that, and, like, slaps her hand.
Pet the creature.
You're right. She does.
She,
she does immediately think that they are animals. Okay.
Right. That's the part. Like, she immediately assumes that they're animals and not intelligent beings. She does have a quote that says, instead of kicking something, maybe I'll just cry instead. Girl, been there.
Yep. Yeah, I get that. So after this kind of attack, she's got some hair pulled out. She fell quite a bit into this cave. Vectel's pissed because this ostensibly his mate, quote unquote, put herself in harm's way, didn't listen to him. I am man, hear me roar kind of thing. So this brings Georgie to a low point. She's been through a lot, understandably. But it's very short-lived. She seems to snap out of it pretty quickly because Vectel provides roasted meat and also a fire. And then they have this kind of quintessential word exchange thing, point, say the word kind of situation. So he has fed her. They're doing this word exchange things. And this is where we get 2 crucial points of information. One is that it's actively snowing outside and it's snowing them into the cave. And 2, we get the first description of what the fuck Georgie looks like. She has honey brown colored hair. And that's it.
That's all we know.
That's all we get. Yeah.
What a woman.
And we only get that because Vectel is noticing that her hair was wet and frozen and is now drying in the heat of the fire that he has put
I think he also alludes to her having like curls or waves, but that's it.
So
yep.
Very at one point small. She's sitting there like eating, and she's saying to her, so Georgie is saying to herself, he won't touch me, won't look at me because it's arousing him and he doesn't want to push me into anything. Really, for a big barbarian, he's being the perfect gentleman. And my note here is, yeah, except for the a non-consensual cunnilingus that he gave you earlier. Like,
Right. Exactly.
Yes.
We're just forgetting about that point. There are a couple of linguistic choices here that I don't prefer. For one, this author chooses to use the term juices, which can we use literally anything else?
Anything else.
Slickness, arousal, literally anything. With the term juices, coupled with the fact that she's still in that goddamn shit-covered, gore-covered jumpsuit, I just fucking can't. The other thing was she refers to Georgie feeling the base of his sack, S-A-C, and I can't really put a finger on why that riles me, but it does. Not my favorite thing
That it's
to describe.
that it's spelled that way,
Yeah.
or that it's just touching, because it's like an egg sack, not like
Right,
a sack
exactly.
Of
It's an egg
potatoes.
sack.
Sack of balls.
Right. Yeah. The final logistic thing is that in case you don't know how to put Legos together, the nub perfectly matches where her clit is. So that's what that's for. The final thing that I will say here is that she says this part about 2 licks and I'm moaning, 3 more and I'm grinding my hips against his face. And all I could think about was that stupid Tootsie Pop commercial with the owl that's like a 1, a 2, a 3.
Oh my god.
I didn't realize this until you said a few minutes ago talking about the little horn and how, like, Legos go together. One of the things that Vectel continues to be fascinated by is her, quote, third nipple, which he is referring to the clit. Why did evolution provide him with a clit stimulator if that's uncommon for his female species? Literally, what is the evolutionary point of that?
That is a really good point. Yeah.
Okay, so so that's a great point. So in this scene, Georgie at the end of it again mentions the pregnant thing. But when we switch back to Vectel's perspective, shortly after the scene, he's very baby crazy. And I just can't help thinking, foreshadowing, hello, it's me.
He immediately is like, oh yes, our kid. Well, so the last thing I want to say to take the segue to part 4 is that they finish having sex and they are going to go up the mountain now. And Vectel does say something very cute where he says, from now until my spirit departs this plane, there shall be none for me but her. Which is a very nice line. It's very cute. But then, bam, there's a dead body. Yeah. And we get a little bit more of that, but Vectel does find this
very
dead body.
jarring, yeah.
And all I could imagine is it's Dominique. We'll get into that in part 4, but it's Dominique's dead body. Being outside somewhere in the frigid tundra, freezing to death, and just hearing people going at it. Because she dies, like, right outside the cave. Like, they find her quickly. So she could hear them going at it while she's dying.
So we don't know how at this point that she has come to this fate, but seeing her rattles both Vectel and Georgie. And it makes them go up to the crashed cargo hold that much faster. When they arrive... Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, it makes Vectel realize why Georgie wants to go up there. Because up to this point, he didn't realize that there were, like, other people. So now he gets that urgency.
That's a very good point. And so when they arrive, we understand that 5 women are still alive. Kira, Liz, Tiffany, Megan, and Josie. The girls are very obviously frightened by Vectel, but they're relieved to see Georgie, and they get over kind of their intimidation of Vectel pretty quickly.
Also, speaking of, like, the other women in the rescue mission, when they meet the other women, they are all, like, pretty chill with the fact that she was just fucking this alien while they are literally freezing and starving to death. Like, they just tease her.
So I do think they mentioned that at some point, and I think, like, one of the things that, I don't know if somebody says it or if maybe Georgie says it to herself, but, like, they just seem so thankful that someone has come that they're just sort of like, it's fine, I guess. Like, what is the alternative?
They kind of gloss over the fact. So Kira, the woman with the kind of ear tag translator thing, can understand Vectel. And so Vectel's saying, my resonance, love of my life kind of thing. I need to go out and get firewood. I'll be back. Please take care of my mate. And this is the first time that Georgie's like able to understand fully what he's saying. And she's like, wait a minute. And like, it's a very non-event. Like, she's kind of freaked out and she's like, we're going to have to talk about this later. But that's essentially how all of the women find out that she was delayed by like basically several hours because she was getting some alien nookie. And I'm like, they're all taking it very well. I would be fucking pissed.
Yeah, I would too.
So in this interaction before Vectel goes out and tries to get more firewood to keep the women warm, we learn two things. The first one is that Vectel had a lover in his village who ended up, quote unquote, vibrating or resonating. So her kui started vibing with somebody else's kui. And so that opened up the question for me, like, this seems like a fated mate situation, and it feels like you can not love the person that your kui vibrates for. And I have a lot of questions about that. But also, it's doubled down on the fact that without a kui, the assumption is that all of the women will sicken and die. And we do have kind of murmurings of that with the state of the women. So one of them has a cough. They all feel pretty worse for wear. And I guess the assumption here is that, they're in the cold and living off of rations. And so maybe that's part of it. We don't really get a good idea of, like, how this sickened death sentence is really going to affect them.
Yes, that's a good point. Like, Vectel mentions it and Kira can translate it, that he calls the kui sickness, but he can't explain what that is, and they obviously don't know what that is.
Yeah, we do get some verbiage clues here. So in an exchange that Vectel has with Kira, he mentions a word that gets translated as a parasite. And so this is the first kind of inkling that we have that maybe a kui is not as akin to a soul, and it's more of like this organism symbiotic relationship situation. My question is whether a kui is some sort of weird tapeworm. I have questions.
Also, we do find out that we forgot to mention that we find out that Vectel is the chief of the tribe, and I have the question that he's the chief and he can just like not chief, just be frolicking around having sex with this blender ostensibly.
To be fair though, I think his tribe is like, what, 20 people? Like,
so he does say that it's 20 unmated males and 5 adult females.
Right, it's 25 people.
30 people, yeah. So you have 5 females that are mated.
Right, and so then like by that logic, like so these other guys are hunting, so there's like 10 people left at his village. Like, what is he really got to do as a leader in that situation? There's no paperwork to be filled out there. Like,
fair.
So he goes off and he tries to, along with firewood, get some more meat. And so he is hunting specifically for this particular animal, and it's spelled DVISTI, which I hear in my head as DVST, like a wee beastie kind of Scottish accent.
I also heard it as a devisty. I like your wee beastie.
I also heard it as devisty. Actually, devisty or devisti was what I was reading it as, but
he goes off alone, which crucially leaves Georgie alone with the other women to kind of talk. And I find it interesting in this internal monologue. Georgie has almost completely forgotten about Dominique because she says this thing. She's just so glad that all of the girls are alive. And I'm like, except for that one girl, right?
Except for the 2 that died in the car crash. Except for the couple that froze to death. Except for the one who froze to death outside. Car crash. You know what I mean.
So in this conversation that Georgie is having alone with the other women, Liz starts asking about Vectel, and G says this thing after making light of her actions, like, even as I say it, it feels wrong to make my relationship with Vectel sound like it's just survival. And I'm like, okay, girl, but it is. Like, you have no idea anything about this guy, his life, or his expectations. You've spent less than 3 days together, and that's not a relationship. And so, like, I understand the connection that they're trying to make between, like, the kui resonance and fated mates, but it's just, it feels like instant intimacy, and I'm not
because
on
it
board
has
with it.
again been maybe 48 hours,
right,
at best.
So at the end of this conversation, they do reference Dominique, and And the general attitude from the other women is that Dominique just didn't want to be alive anymore. And so it's intimated that she maybe committed suicide by running off into the wilderness. So Vectel returns and they discuss this plan that his plan that makes sense is that he and Georgie are going to go back to Vectel's tribe and return with more hunters so that they can help the other women down from the mountain. So with that plan in mind, Vectel and Georgie start on their descent to the tribe, wherever that might be. On the way, they make a pit stop in this, quote, elder cave, and that turns out to be another spaceship. So before they actually discover that this is actually a spaceship, they like immediately get into the cave and start fucking. But this time it's from Vectel's perspective, and holy shit, is there a lot of baby shit going on.
So much baby
It's awful.
bacon. But I would like to point out that they have only had sex missionary.
I have that note too. Anyway, after they have a brief sexual interlude, they find out that this is a spaceship, and we learn a couple of interesting things here. One, we learn that Vectel is a modified SAKH, which I hear as sake.
I had it as sock.
I had it a sock.
Okay. Sock. So we learn that he's descended from a group of Sock that sheltered on this planet from a pleasure cruiser crash, and the ship that they're in is that pleasure cruiser.
Pleasure cruiser, as in like a sex brothel in the space,
no,
or
like a recreational cruise ship.
Got it. Okay, that's what I thought. When you said pleasure cruiser, I wanted to clarify that like maybe I didn't miss that, like maybe that's why he's so crazy about sex, is because he's literally descended from sex workers on a spaceship.
No, I took it as just like a booze cruise.
But anyway, they crash, there's a distress signal malfunction, and as a result, everybody's stranded there. And so all of the survivors of the crash had to accept the Kui in a symbiotic relationship for survival. This is where we learned that, yes, a Kui is kind of a parasite, and it modifies its host to be able to live in an atmosphere that has a noxious gas that will kill both Sock and humans. So it's basically an element that is described as not being discovered on Earth yet, but it is noxious to both humans and Sock. This organism helps them process it. Once the Kui is essentially made a part of its host, that union can't be undone, though. And so that creates this kind of zero-sum game, right? So Georgie and ostensibly the rest of the women are now presented with the choice that they have to accept a Kui or get the fuck out of Not-Hoth.
The computer has the ability to do a one-time linguistic upload so that Georgie can speak to Vectel.
Right. Which she opts to do. And so it basically does a transfer into her brain through her eye, which makes her collapse. And Vectel freaks out.
Obviously, because he doesn't she has also been speaking to the computer in English, so he has no idea what's been going on in this entire conversation.
So when Georgie comes to, they can understand each other, and it's honestly not as touching of a moment as I expected it to be. It's kind of a, oh, how did you learn my language? Oh, the computer taught me. Okay, no follow-ups. Like, there was just no, like, for me, if I had had the relationship that Georgie has had with Vectel in this, like, hyper-focused, emotional, like, pressure cooker, I would have had some follow-up questions, like,
what's your name?
What's your favorite color? What's your name? The thing that we haven't explicitly stated here is that in this conversation, we learned that Kuis resonate, so that thing that Vectel has been feeling is called resonating, because he literally like vibrates or purrs. So two people with different Kuis purr for each other, specifically with the outcome of breeding. They do not purr for another person with whom you cannot reproduce and create strong kids or children with. And so that's kind of the underlying story here, right? Like, not only is it like heterosexual cis, but it is also, hey, y'all are going to have some babies.
We're here to make babies. And to be fair,
right,
it is implied that Vectel's species, his race, is dying out because there aren't a lot of women. It's never explained why that is. But there is that strong implication that they need other women to mate with because they're dying out.
Right. But so they go into his tribe, and we learned that the tribe essentially lives in a hollowed out mountain with a hot spring in the middle, which that sounds heavenly to me. Can you make that a hotel? I would stay there my entire life. Um, we switch back to Vectel's perspective, and he's talking about going to rescue the other women with a bunch of other males. And I'm not going to go through the pronunciation thing because there's a bunch of them, and I just don't care. Maybe if we go into subsequent books, we'll get to their names, but we're just going to skip over that for now. But they have this conversation essentially that's like, hey, we need to go rescue these people because they're women and they might be good for breeding. And I'm like,
Is that the only reason why?
Okay. Yeah, okay, that felt a little bad for me. When he leaves that conversation, he goes back to Georgie and they have relations. And then immediately the conversation about children comes up again. So again, reiterated, children only happen from mating, and mating only happens to produce children. It's that there's no other gray area. That's what mating is in this universe. This is where we're introduced to the concept that time doesn't make sense in this planet because G realizes that she's quote unquote late. So let's take a quick biology lesson. Let's assume for a moment that G was ovulating when she and Vectel had sex the first day. That was 2 days ago. Ma'am, there is no way that you will know that you are pregnant 2 days after you have sex, even if you're ovulating. There's no fucking way. There's no way.
Thank you. That is not how pregnancy works.
So, to confirm, it is pretty much assumed at this point that Georgie is pregnant by Vectel. And in that context, the next morning, the group of hunters, all males except for Georgie, head out to rescue the other girls. We learn that on the way, they stop at the, quote, Elder Cave spaceship, and some of the men learn English so they can communicate with the humans. We are told that Rahosh, I forgot his name, Rahosh, goes first to learn English. He is kind of perceived as fearless in that way. And when they arrive, he immediately goes for Liz, and some of the other men start to help out, and somebody immediately starts resonating, and Georgie says, "Who was that?" And nobody cops to it.
One of the other women, I don't know if it's Liz or Kira, but Georgie immediately tells them that she's pregnant. Like, this is an announcement, this is happening, and they all just, none of them know how ovulation works.
No questions asked. No follow-up questions. Not a single goddamn one of them. And I'm just like, are women so dumb in this book?
In this process of telling them that she's pregnant now, which, again, so many questions, she also explains the whole, like, cooey thing and says, like, you know, do we want to wait here for the green men to come back and get us, or do we want to go with them? Like, we have to get this parasite if we want to do that. Like, what do you want to do? And Liz says, you know, you're not complaining. If they treat us half as good as Vectel's been treating you, it's not a terrible thing. And it beats being cattle, doesn't it? Does it?
You're still breeders.
You're still breeded cattle. Like, you're still there to be bred. Like, that's, I don't see how the two are different, if I'm honest.
I feel like they're so weak that they're not allowing themselves the choice. And like that perspective, like, he treats you so well, blah, 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 how bad can it be? Bad, girl, it can be bad. Because men are still men. You saw that on the ship. Like, aliens can still be dickbags. Like, it could be potentially bad. Like, how are you making this giant leap of faith?
No,
I don't get
nothing about them. Like, to me, this kind of, I mean, Vectel has been in no way abusive, but to me, this screams like a hidden abusive relationship. Like, you look perfectly happy. What could go wrong?
Right. Yeah, I mean, so the choice that we're talking about, they can stay and fight, is that ostensibly the little green men and the basketball heads are going to come back for the cargo that they dropped off at some point. And so the thought process is, well, they can be there for that, fight them, gain control of their working ship, and then potentially fly back home, assuming that they can figure out how to fly it. That's the other option. But to me, the problem with that is that it's so black and white that there's no chance for the women to be their own individual selves between those two choices. Like, it's either you're beholden to these little green men and the basketball heads, or you're breeding mares for all of these tribal men
that you don't know.
Right.
And they're gonna fight.
So in this, at the end of this, or as a part of this conversation, I should say, we come to understand that Georgie wants to stay. And that's when all of the other women decide that they want to stay as well, and they decide that they're going to wake up the other 6 that are in the cryo tubes. We forgot about them for a while. They're still there. They're going to wake them up and make them Jews as well.
And this is a happy surprise for Vectel because he was never told about the cryotubes until this very moment.
Correct. So to tell Vectel this, we switch back to Vectel's perspective. Georgie is relaying this information, and beyond the fact that it's weird that he's just like overjoyed that there's more breeding mares, the other part of this conversation that I found weird was that this is the first time that Georgie's telling him how they ended up there. So she's telling him about the fact that they were a part of a cargo bay. It was jettisoned. They were taken from their homes. These people are probably going to come back to like do whatever and sell them into whatever life that they had envisioned for them at first. And my question is, did you not have a TLDR of my life after you banged in their village? Like, are you saying that y'all fucked and then you had no conversation? Like,
About
you had no follow-up questions. Like, I just can't.
Truly, I don't understand that either.
They introduced this concept of having 6 other people, and the men are like, I guess we need more food. So they go out to hunt again, and this is where we find out that there is a Sakosk nearby. And again, Sakosks are where you get the Koees from. Koees.
Woo-woo.
Koees? Kawoo. Yeah. Yeah. So this Sakosk is near, and it's a biggin. And so immediately everybody decides that they are going to leave and go kill it so that they can get parasites for the women. So some of the new women in particular balk. But the conversation or kind of the discussion about this plan is cut short because Kira, her earpiece starts going haywire, which they intuit to mean that the aliens are coming. And something that we didn't talk about is that when they were being inoculated, when Georgie was on the table, when she first woke up after being abducted, they put something in her arm and they assumed that it was a tracker. And so all of the women have this, but it starts to light up just as Kira's earpiece starts to go off. And so all of the women have this in their arm. It's lighting up. Everybody's freaking out.
They cut the trackers out and they throw them into a den of metlax. For
Yes.
fun.
So on their way to kill this Sakosk, one of the things that I found kind of funny is that we get this from Georgie's perspective, and she is immediately annoyed by the 6 new girls who are, by all accounts, whiny. She wants them to get with the program, and like, I want to be irritated by your actions, but if I'm honest, like, I would 100% act the same way. Like, especially if I had been there for a couple of days, I'm just like, we're telling you it's safe. Like, get with the program. Like, we're good. Stop freaking out. Don't worry about it.
We did relate her to Bella Swan before, and Bella Swan is completely a gray blob, where Georgie does have a solid personality, and it is highly relatable. Because I feel the same. Like, I had the thought where I was like, damn, girl, you need to calm down. These girls, like, just woke up. They don't even know if they've been abducted. And now you're going to tell them that they're stuck on this planet with giant men who want to impregnate them. But I, too, would be like, shut the fuck up. Stop whining. We're doing this thing. Roll out.
Get with the program. So the killing of the Sakosk is actually pretty quick. It's like a couple of pages. It's not that intensive. Nobody even remotely gets hurt. But they have to, like, go in, and by they, I mean Vectel has to, like, cut the belly of this thing open and, like, go and get its heart. And that's where all of these, like,
worms,
electric blue wiggly worms are, and those are the Koees. And so in order to accept a Koee, you have to make an incision in your skin and put it in your flesh. And so that sounds very hardcore, but Georgie goes first. Vectel makes the incision on her collarbone, and she accepts because she realizes she has to be strong for the rest of the girls, not just because Vectel is the tribal chief, but she's been designated as the leader of the rest of these women. And so she does it. She takes the Koee and immediately passes out.
When she wakes up, she immediately feels great. She's warm. She's not cold anymore because the Koee has fucked with her DNA, and now she can live on this planet. But she asks about all the other women, and Vectel says that they all took the Kawi, which, if I watch you put a parasite in your neck and you pass out, I'm waiting till you wake up again. And they
100%.
don't.
Yeah.
They all just like, okay, this looks great.
She could be dead. Who knows?
Right.
Let's go.
See more for book 2.
See book 2 for, yes. See more for
Because
book 2.
when she wakes up, they're like, yep, everyone took it. And she's like, oh, hey, where is Liz? And Vectel's like, oh,
What's his face?
she's with some dude, Rahush or whatever, like, took her and is gone. And don't worry about it. She'll be back. We'll just wait for them.
The specific verbiage is he slunk off with her like a metlack with a kill. And I'm just like,
And it's implied that, like, he resonated for her and he's taking her to mate, but rape? Like, you can't just take her into the forest.
Like, Georgie asks Vectel if Liz is going to be okay and if Rahosh will hurt her. And he responds that he wants to mate her, not hurt her. And I'm like, if she doesn't want it, it's rape and that's doing harm.
That would be
sir.
hurting her.
Basically, once that's not really resolved but ignored, Georgie is, surprising to no one, horny again. She's horny and wants to have sex because now
she's resonating.
She's resonating. Her whole body is resonating for Vectel. And she's like, man, I'm really horny, but like I should stay here. And Vectel's like, nah, fuck it, let's go let's go fuck in the woods. Like
all these girls are fine with these men who may rape them.
It's fine. Don't worry about it. Don't ask questions.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of, again, they do it doggy style. We've been alluding to this the whole time, but apparently the socks can't do it doggy style because of the tails. I have questions about the tail, but they do it doggy style because obviously Georgie doesn't have a tail. And that's new and great for both of them. And then they're like naked, fucking on this rock. And the aliens that dropped the girls off in the cargo hold, their ship like bloop, 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 hovers over the area, kind of like darts around looking for them. And they're like mid-fuck. They're just like freeze and they watch. And then the aliens figure out that they don't want the metlaks that the trackers are a part of. And so they fuck off. And so the aliens leave and then they go right back to it until Vectel spurts.
The word is spurt.
Spurt! Why? I just can't. And that's how the book ends.
So anticlimactic with the other aliens. Like, they are the entire crux of this plot. Like, why anyone is even here. And they don't even land.
Just to reorient our listeners, we rate on 3 primary axes. The first is spice level, the next is writing style, and then finally the quality of the plot. And then we end with an overall, do you recommend it question. So let's start with spice level. So Des, what is your spice level
It's a
rating,
3
1
for
to
me.
5?
I think it's a medium. Like there's plenty of it, and it's relatively well written, but it's not crazy out there, and it's not non-existent. So 3.
Liz, what's your rating?
Mine is a 2 because while I do think there's plenty of it, it's not a book I would reach for during personal time.
I like that. I also rated it as a 3. I thought that it was well written and there was plenty of it. Not adventurous and, it did the job, I guess, as part of the smut in a book. Moving into the writing style, I would rate that as a 4. I think I've mentioned a couple of times that I really found the way that she writes relatable, and it was just very easy to read. It hooked me immediately, and so I really liked that. Liz, what do you think the writing style rating would be for you?
I also rated it as a 4. Like you said, it was very relatable and easy to read. But the fact that she was able to differentiate 2 distinct voices is really hard to do, and I love me a point of view switching book, and it's hard to do. So that in and of itself, her writing style is very good.
I gave it a 3. I think it is well written and there's nothing inherently wrong or bad about it, but it didn't like grab me and like a whoa, like the way that these words are strung together is very impressive or anything like that. I also personally like don't super love a book that makes a lot of modern day references. I think these were pretty muted, so it wasn't really aggressive. There have been other books that we've read that are, and we'll talk about those later, but so I give it a 3.
And our final rating is the quality of the storytelling. So, Des, what would you rate?
So I think I differ from you guys in a pretty significant way here. I think the storytelling is actually a 4. I think she knew what kind of story she wanted to write, and it's very clear. Like, the way that she gets from point A to point B, like it's thought out. I think there's a lot of holes, but I think it accomplishes the task and the story that she wanted to tell.
Liz, what's your rating?
So I think we approached maybe what storytelling is differently, because I think as an author, Ruby Dixon told the story she wanted to tell. But from a plot standpoint, it didn't hold up as a plot for me. There were too many holes to the point where I think it was distracting while I was reading. But again, I am Liz. I'm hypercritical, and I rated it as a 2 because the storytelling plot didn't hold up to the quality of her writing style.
I also rated it as a 2 because I needed to make sense, and there was just so many parts that did not make sense to me. But all that said, ratings aside, I would recommend it. It's a very easy read. It's satisfactory. You could get through it in a day like I did. And I think, if that's up your alley, it might be something quick and easy and fun for someone to read. So, Liz, would you recommend it?
I would recommend it. And I agree. It's an easy read. I also think it's a good, intro smut book because it's not adventurous, but it's clear it's not a close the door sultry book. Like, you see things. And I would recommend it. I would just, hopefully the plot holes, you can suspend your disbelief and enjoy that.
Fair.
I would not recommend it. I think there are so many great books out there, and I think if I were to recommend this book, I would have to list a bunch of caveats out of the gate, and by that standard, I just don't think it's worth recommending. It's has a very interesting story, but I think the plot holes are so egregious that it takes away from the story, and so I think that could be really jarring. And if you only have a limited amount of time to read, there's a million other books there that I could recommend that I think would be worth your time. Not that this isn't, again, personal preferences. Obviously, we have 2 people who really like it. I found myself wanting for that one.
Totally fair.
Totally
well, there
fair.
you have it. We have done Ice Planet Barbarians, Book 1. I hope you enjoyed our recap and our thoughts on the book. Any closing thoughts, ladies?
I'm just so happy to be here. This is the day after Thanksgiving, and I'm just so grateful for our Spice Traders group.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah.
We can cut out the silence. It's fine.
I just want to echo those same notes. I'm just so excited to be doing this with you guys. I think it's going to be a great story, and I'm so excited to share our thoughts with people who are interested in this book and maybe don't have the time to get into it the way that they wish they did.
Agreed. All right, listeners, thank you again for the time. Hope you have a lovely rest of your day, afternoon, evening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.